Hello and welcome to Ahval Podcasts, the home of objective, up-to-date and independent reporting on Turkey. Don't forget to follow our reports through social media, on ahvalnews.com or through our mobile app. Let's get started.
Hello, welcome to the Ahval Pod. Today we have very special guest, Blaise Misztal, who is a fellow at Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C., one of the leading think tanks in Washington, D.C. His research program focuses on Middle East, Europe, and strategic competition. Mitszal was the director of the Bipartisan Policy Center's National Security Program previously, and his contribution to U.S Turkey relation issues and great panels and papers were very important. Welcome to the program, Blaise.
Thanks for having me on, Ilhan.
Let me, obviously, we are going to talk about the elections. And what did you see on Sunday night? What has changed in Turkey with the elections?
Well, I think first and foremost, what we've seen is incredible joy from the people in Istanbul and throughout Turkey at having their voices heard. And I think what that has brought back, what has long been missing in Turkey, is a sense of hope and optimism and a sense of agency that the people of Turkey can, in fact, sway and influence the government and the direction of their own country, which is a fundamental aspect of democracy, something that the people of Turkey certainly should have and have been denied for too long, unfortunately, in recent years.
Excellent. So it's very cliche, but that means, in your view, Turkish democracy is not dead.
It appears that it is back from the dead. Would be the way to put it.
I couldn't hear the last word.
It appears that it is back from the dead.
Back from the dead. Okay. So some respected analysts say that this was a fatal blow. This was not just any defeat in the election, but this is going to bring Erdogan's end. And a lot of many headlines say that this is the beginning of the end. Do you think it is that important?
I would say that we have learned over the last 15 years, more than 15 years, that Recep Tayyip Erdogan is never to be underestimated. And I would also caution that I think what happened on Sunday was the confluence of a number of factors and coincidences which don't yet make a trend. Obviously, the CHP had a very strong and attractive candidate in the form of İmamoğlu. They also benefited from an alliance, a tacit alliance with the HDP. But there was also obviously dissatisfaction among the AKP's own voting base that caused a number of AKP voters to switch their vote in the second election. All of that does not add up to a significant shift yet in Turkey's political landscape, which is to say Erdogan can still recover from this and maybe reaffirm or get back some of the AKP voters that thought he overreached, but he might be able to bring them back. The CHP-HDP alliance is still very shaky. It doesn't mean that that's going to be a united opposition front going forward. And İmamoğlu might have been a once-in-a-lifetime candidate. We don't know how well the CHP will be able to do in finding other candidates in the future that will have that same appeal. And also, at least for right now, we have a 4-year stretch between Sunday's election and when parliamentary and presidential elections are scheduled, and a lot can happen between now and 2023. So I think Erdogan has been weakened. The recipe for what it takes to defeat him and to push back on his authoritarianism, I think, is now clear. But there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of taking what happened on Sunday and turning it into a winning political program that's going to last and going to be able to succeed when the next national elections come.
Would you consider this defeat of Erdogan is also end of populism, in a sense that the polarization policies and attitudes are perhaps ending, and instead Imamoglu's new language might win, and going forward, if anyone wants to win, we'll have to deploy similar language of Imamoglu, but not Erdogan's?
I do think that this idea that Erdogan spoke for the real Turkey, and anyone who opposed him therefore had to be an enemy of the state and an enemy of the people, that has been punctured. And we've seen that in the willingness of AKP voters to abandon Erdogan and vote for Imamoglu. They no longer see, Imamoglu as voting for Imamoglu as treason or betrayal of the nation and of the state. Whether that can be maintained going forward, I think, is as much up to the opposition parties and ensuring that they do use an inclusive language. Something that I think it's important to note, we already saw HDP and Demirtas initiate several years ago, and I think Imamoglu is sort of the natural evolution of that. But it's also up to in some ways to Erdogan to see where he goes from here, and how he defines sort of the base that he governs for from here on out. If he continues the polarization, if he continues sort of this nationalistic trend that he's been on, then yes, the Imamoglu language, the inclusiveness, the embrace might work, but it might not if Erdogan decides to adopt it for himself.
I understand. And you mentioned about Selahattin Demirtas and HDP. Apparently, they had a big role in this defeat, and they are, I think, one of the segments in Turkey. They were celebrating on Sunday and Monday about this defeat. Going forward, looking at the Kurds in region, Syria and Turkey, let me ask this way: can Erdogan go forward with continue to this nationalistic language that you mentioned? Can he still afford to alienate Kurds after this election?
The political calculus there might change for Erdogan, and he might see that it is not paying off for him to alienate Kurds. But I think his ability to change course right now is very limited. I mean, he certainly tried to do so by reaching out to Abdullah Öcalan, having him send this letter appealing to the Kurds, but that got him nowhere. And in fact, I think one of the other interesting stories out of the election is perhaps the breaking of the stranglehold that Öcalan had on the Kurds. His power seems to be vastly diminished now in favor of Demirtas and the political movement of the HDP. And so even if Erdogan wanted to reach out to the Kurds, it seems that Öcalan's no longer the way to do that. And whether Erdogan can on the one hand, choose to reach out to and try to form a new alliance with Demirtas, and whether Demirtas would accept that, I find both of those very hard to imagine at this point.
So just to make clear, you think with this Öcalan letter, which was published last Thursday, a couple days before the election, was calling HDP voters to kind of stay away from the ballot boxes. Apparently, it did not go well with the HDP voters. Even the HDP leaders went to the ballot boxes and voted for İmamoğlu. Is this episode, in your view, undermine Öcalan's influence in expense of Demirtas? Is this your view?
It certainly seems to be. We'll have to see what happens going forward. But the very clear results in which Öcalan was not listened to, and Demirtas, and the tacit endorsement of İmamoğlu was listened to by the Kurds really suggests that the sort of center of gravity of the Kurdish movement has shifted dramatically.
And İmamoğlu, I personally did not know İmamoğlu till 6 months ago, and now he is one of the most known politicians in Turkey as well as in the world, which relates to Turkish politics. How did you find him? Is he, do you think, so far proven to be someone who can challenge Erdogan going forward?
He certainly ran an incredible campaign twice. He found a way to disarm Erdogan's attacks in a way that no one really seems to have been able to thus far, and articulated a vision for, at least for Istanbul, but implicit in that, a larger vision for Turkey that was more than just either recycling of old ideology or playing to a party base. And I think all of those are incredible accomplishments. And many people in Washington have for a long time complained that the Turkish opposition is too old and too decrepit and really not capable of challenging Erdogan. And so I think for the first or perhaps second time, we've seen someone emerge on the political stage who might be capable of doing that. Of course, winning an election once or twice in several months for Istanbul mayor is still not quite the same as being ready to challenge Erdogan on the world stage or on the national stage. İmamoğlu will have to acquit himself well in running Istanbul as a city, something that I'm sure Erdogan will not make easy for him. And he'll have to survive the 4 years between now and the next election and maintain that same appeal, that same charisma, and that same positive message if he's going to run against Erdogan. But he's also going to have to survive the internal politics of the CHP party, which hasn't always been eager to let young, vibrant leaders come to the fore.
Definitely. Well, I invited you to discuss about the elections, but I have to ask this Trump-Erdogan meeting and S-400, F-35, as well as Katsa embargoes. You are one of the experts in Washington who knows a lot about whether Magnitsky or Katsa and congressional initiatives. Can you, I know this is a very big question, but can you tell me what your expectation for Erdogan-Trump meeting? Then what is your expectation about how this S-400 episode is going to end?
I think we've seen repeatedly that Trump and Erdogan personally have a very good rapport. And when they speak one-on-one, either in person or on the phone, Erdogan is able to get a lot of what he wants, at least initially, from President Trump. The most recent example of that being the conversation they had on the phone in December of 2018, where Erdogan persuaded Trump to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. Of course, as we saw with that example, things that Trump might agree to with Erdogan don't always survive the policy process here in Washington. So I would expect the conversation between the two of them to be quite friendly, and perhaps even find places of agreement. That being said, I think that the F-35 decision is very deeply ingrained in the U.S. bureaucracy and policy community. There's widespread agreement in Congress that if Turkey gets the S-400, it cannot have the F-35. There is widespread agreement in the Department of Defense. There's widespread agreement on this in the Department of State. And there's language being inserted into the defense bill and the defense budget that Congress is working on right now that will make it impossible for Turkey to get the F-35 if it gets the S-400. And that's probably something that President Trump won't be able to do anything about, even if he wanted to. I think that has to be seen as a very separate issue and a matter of U.S. national security. It's not about punishing Turkey. It's not about anything having to do with trying to change Turkish behavior. It's just a matter of fact that the U.S. has such importance to preserving the security of the F-35 that it cannot give it to any country that has the S-400. A different matter is sanctions that are in the Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act that would apply to any country that purchases weapons from the Russian defense industry. Those are designed to punish countries that do business with Russia. And they are something that President Trump has a lot more control over. He can delay them. He can give waivers to countries so that they don't receive those sanctions. And I think that is something where we might see Presidents Trump and Erdogan strike a deal to avoid those sanctions.
Excellent. If I push a little bit, I mean, do you think Turkey is going to end up buying and deploying S-400s in Turkish soil?
It seems very hard to imagine Turkey changing course at this point, both because President Erdogan and every official below him has repeatedly said this is a done deal, because there seems to be little impetus for them to change as well. I don't see how the results of the election on Sunday, which were for the mayor of Istanbul, affect their thinking. And also because, at least from the U.S. side, I don't think there's that much desire to really trade with Erdogan on this issue. I think there's an expectation in Washington that as a NATO ally, as a U.S. partner, this should be something that is self-evident to Turkey that it should not buy Russian equipment. And this idea that maybe we need to do something more than give Turkey a good deal on Patriots, I don't think has a lot of leverage in the United States. So I don't think Erdogan's going to get anything out of the United States other than a good offer on the Patriots. I don't think he has a lot of reason to back down domestically as well. So it would seem that this is going to go ahead in the next several weeks. He said that that the S-400s are going to arrive in July.
So it's going to be some rough weeks ahead of us. Thank you so much for coming on today, and we are following you very closely. Your panel at Hudson Institute about a month ago was unbelievably useful, and since then I think several panels basically echoed what that panel discussed about a month ago, even before the elections. And we are going to continue monitor the situation and hopefully speaking to you again. And thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ilhan.